Welcome to the Madison Miller Podcast Special Edition Series, where I predict how every men's college basketball tournament will play out as I go round by round and pick winners based on my projections. Next up, the Atlantic-10. This should be fun. So before I do my predictions for the tournament, I'm going to look back on my preseason predictions and see how I did. In first place, I had VCU. They ended up coming in 9th. That was a bad pick. Second place, I had Davidson. They came in 7th. Another bad pick. Third place, I had Dayton, who ended up winning the conference. Fourth, I had Rhode Island, who came in 3rd. Fifth, I had St. Louis. They came in 4th. Sixth, I had St. Bonaventure, who came in 5th. Seventh, I had Richmond, who came in 2nd. They were a big surprise this year. Eighth, I had George Mason. They ended up coming in 12th. Ninth, I had Duquesne. They ended up coming in 6th. 10th, I had St. Joe's, who came in 13th. 11th, I had LaSalle. They ended up coming in 10th. 12th, I had George Washington. They came in 11th. 13th, I had UMass, who came in 8th. They were a surprise this year. And last, I had Fordham. They came in last. So, without further ado, here are my predictions for the Atlantic-10 tournament, which will be held at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. All right, first round, Wednesday, March 11th. That's tomorrow, 1 o'clock, ESPN+. You have 12-seeded George Mason against the 13-seeded St. Joe's. St. Joe's, 6-25 on the year, 2-16 in conference play. George Mason, 16-15 on the year, 5-13 in conference play. The pick, George Mason, and I have them as an 8-point favorite. The other first round game, 3:30 p.m. ESPN+. You got 14-seeded Fordham versus 11-seeded George Washington. Fordham 8-22 on the year, 2-16 in conference play. And George Washington 12-19 on the year, 6-2 or 6-12 in conference play. The pick is George Washington, and I have them projected as a 6-point favorite. The second round, Thursday, March 12th, 12 o'clock on NBC Sports Network. You got 9-seeded VCU versus 8-seeded UMass. VCU 18-13 on the year, so 8-10 in conference play. UMass 14-17 on the year, 8-10 in conference play. The pick, VCU, and I have them as a 2-point favorite. Then you got 12-seeded George Mason versus 5-seeded St. Bonaventure, 2:30 NBCSN. St. Bonaventure 19-12 on the year, 11-7 in conference play. The pick is St. Bonaventure, and I have them projected as a 7.5-point favorite. 10-seeded LaSalle versus 7-seeded Davidson, 6 o'clock on NBC Sports Network on Thursday, March 12th. LaSalle, 15-15 on the year, 6-12 in conference play. Davidson, 16-14 on the year, 10-8 in conference play. The pick, Davidson, and I have them projected as a 4.5-point favorite. 11-seeded George Washington versus 6-seeded Duquesne, 8:30 on NBCSN on Thursday night, March 12th. Duquesne, 21-9 on the season, 11-7 in conference play. The pick here is Duquesne, and I have them projected as a 9.5-point favorite in this matchup. Quarterfinals Friday, March 13th. You got 9-seeded VCU versus 1-seeded Dayton at 12 o'clock on NBCSN. Dayton 29-2 on the season, 18-0 in conference play. The pick is Dayton, and they are projected to be a 15.5-point favorite. 2:30 on NBCSN on Friday, March 13th. You got 5-seeded St. Bonaventure versus 4-seeded St. Louis. St. Louis 23-8 on the year, 12-6 in conference play. The pick, St. Louis, and I have them projected as a 3-point favorite. 7-seeded Davidson versus 2-seeded Richmond. 6 o'clock on BCSN on Friday, March 13th. Richmond 24-7 on the season, 14-4 in conference play. The pick, Richmond, and I have them projected as a 7.5-point favorite. 6-seeded Duquesne versus 3-seeded Rhode Island on Friday, March 13th at 8:30 NBC Sports Network in the quarterfinal. Rhode Island 21-9 on the year, 13-5 in conference play. The pick, Rhode Island, and I have them projected as only a 1.5-point favorite. Semifinals Saturday, March 14th, 1 o'clock CBS Sports Network. You got 4-seeded St. Louis versus 1-seeded Dayton. And the pick here is Dayton, and I have them projected as a 9-point favorite. This should be a good game. St. Louis, I think, has a chance here. They're a good team, but ultimately Dayton is undefeated in the conference for a reason. And the other semifinal game, 3:30 on CBS Sports Network. 3-seeded Rhode Island versus 2-seeded Richmond. This should be a great game between two teams that have been really, really good. Richmond has been the surprise team of this conference this season, and I think they're going to move on to the championship game here, and they are under some pressure here because they're in the mix for an at-large. And if they lose before the championship, they're not getting it. So, I'm going to go with Richmond here, and I have them projected as a 2.5-point favorite here. And the championship, Sunday, March 15th, 1 o'clock on CBS. 2-seeded Richmond versus 1-seeded Dayton. This should be a really good game between the best team in the conference and then a really, really good team in Richmond. I mentioned Richmond is under pressure. Obi Toppin could very well be the National Player of the Year. And he's obviously the best player on the court in this game, and he'll lead the Friars to yet another victory and to the auto bid of the NCAA tournament. So the pick here is Dayton, and I have them projected as a 6.5-point favorite. Next up, the Pac-12.